Imagine being in a park and seeing a child pointing to a trash can, crying inconsolably. When you decide to investigate, you find a clue that changes everything. A lost piece of clothing tied to a desperate disappearance. Want to know how this story ends? Subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts. My name is Olivia Myers. When I look in the mirror, I see the signs of sleepless nights and a weariness in my eyes that I can't hide. I think my job does this to me. It drains every part of my being, even those I thought were unbreakable. I'm a social worker, and my specialty is dealing with child disappearances. This means facing day after day the empty gaze of parents who have lost the light in their eyes, children taken from them in ways that defy all understanding. I've seen it all. I've handled cases that were resolved quickly and others that never found an end. And even when there's closure, the pain remains. But somehow, Emily's case affected me in a different way. She was only 6 when she disappeared, exactly the same age my sister Clara was when she vanished without a trace. Every time I look at Emily's picture, with her sweet smile and the blue dress with the embroidered flower on her chest, something breaks inside me. I try to push away the pain, trying to focus on work, but the truth is Clara is still present. The weight of an unsolved case isn't something you can carry and then set aside. Every morning I wake up at 5, brew a strong coffee, and begin the daily ritual of reviewing reports, investigating leads, and making endless calls. My desk at the office is covered with documents, photos of missing children, medical records, witness statements, scattered information that needs to be organized into a logical line. Many of these leads end up going nowhere, but still, I persist. Most of my colleagues would have given up on many of these cases, but I can't abandon hope, even when it seems futile. And, of course, Jeremy is always there to remind me of that. Jeremy is a private investigator who works on most of the disappearance cases in the city, and he never misses an opportunity to mock my work. He thinks I'm naive for caring so much, that my heart will end up blinding me and causing me to make mistakes. Maybe he's right. My dedication often crosses the line of rationality. But I can't help it. And it's precisely why Emily's case is different. I can't fail, not this time. With every call I make, I hear the echo of Emily's mother's voice in my ear, pleading for help, and I remember my own mother, sitting on the couch, lost between tears and silence, years ago when Clara disappeared. The memory of Clara is a specter that won't leave me. I was 16 at the time, and for a long time I thought I had failed her. I should have been more attentive, more protective, maybe even stronger. That's why today I dive headfirst into each case, searching for answers that might save other families from what mine went through. But sometimes I feel like I'm just running in circles. The clock in the office makes a dry sound with every passing second, as if mocking my inability to find answers. On this particular morning, as I reviewed Emily's file, I felt an extra weight. With each page, my heart beat a little faster. The report described the girl's last steps before her disappearance. The last place she was seen, the toys she had in her backpack, the strawberry ice cream she held in her hand. I closed my eyes, trying to block the feeling of déjà vu that threatened to swallow me. I knew this story by heart, but it was as if I were reliving something I would rather forget. Amid the chaos of papers, Marianne, my colleague, knocked on the door of my small office. "You need a break, Olivia," she said in her usual gentle tone. Marianne is my anchor, the only person who can make me stop, even if for a moment, to breathe. She left a cup of tea on the corner of the desk, and for a second, I considered taking her advice. But work was calling me. I still had to talk to the officer in charge of Emily's case, and I knew it would be a difficult conversation. The police don't always cooperate with social workers, especially when they think we're overstepping our boundaries. I went down to the station with a heavy heart. The city was cold that morning, and I felt every gust of cutting wind pierce through my thin coat. When I arrived, Jeremy was already there, leaning against the counter with the relaxed posture of someone in no hurry. He saw me and gave that mocking smile typical of him. "Here comes the social worker who thinks she's a detective," he teased, but I didn't take the bait. I walked past, trying to ignore him. I had more important things to deal with than proving anything to Jeremy. During the meeting with the officer, I asked for access to some records that could help connect the dots between Emily's disappearance and other similar cases. He hesitated as usual, citing the need for confidentiality, but I insisted. If we want to find her, we need to look at all the possibilities, I said, trying to keep calm, but my voice trembled a bit. Finally, he agreed, though reluctantly, and I left the station with one more piece of the puzzle in hand. On my way back to the office, I stopped at the park where Emily was last seen. There were children playing on the swings, and the sound of their laughter cut through the air, brutally contrasting with the emptiness I felt. I walked to the exact spot where she disappeared, trying to imagine what might have happened, but all I saw was the void and darkness of uncertainty. I knew I couldn't give up. Not now. Even though the past still haunted me, I had a purpose. Finding Emily was more than just solving a case. It was a promise to all the missing children, to their families, and most of all, to myself. I would go back to the office that night, willing to spend as many hours as necessary following every lead, no matter how faint. I wouldn't let Emily become just another photo on my desk, another unsolved case, another ghost haunting my thoughts. I needed to keep going, even if it meant facing my own fears. It was a cold afternoon, but the park was full of children playing, running, and laughing as if the world around them were safe and welcoming. I was there for a reason, not to watch the games, but to follow a lead that at first seemed to go nowhere. A witness had mentioned seeing a girl who looked like Emily near the swing days before she disappeared. I knew time was against me, but I had to check every detail, no matter how small. I passed through an iron fence surrounding the park, my mind focused on the steps Emily might have taken. Every empty space between the playground equipment seemed full of unanswered questions, as if the place hid secrets in its darkest corners. I felt the weight of the mission grow heavier on my shoulders, and for a moment, I almost returned to the car. It was cold and the biting wind made my skin tingle. But something, a kind of intuition, told me to keep going. That's when I heard the crying. At first, I thought it was just an ordinary child, upset for not getting the toy they wanted or for falling in the sand. But the sound was different, more desperate, more insistent. I looked around and saw, a few meters away, a woman kneeling next to a small boy, maybe 5 years old, who was sobbing uncontrollably. The woman looked exasperated, almost panicked, trying to calm her son while he kept pointing insistently at something ahead. It was a trash can. My heart skipped a beat. The feeling of unease that invaded me was unusual. Moving slowly closer, I observed the scene cautiously. The boy wouldn't stop crying and pointing, as if something terrible were in that direction. The mother shook her head, visibly frustrated, trying to divert the child's gaze, but he wouldn't relent. The words came out of his mouth amidst sobs, repetitive and nonsensical, and I felt a chill as I got close enough to understand what he was saying. It's looking, he repeated, his voice weak with fear. I approached slowly, trying not to scare the boy any further, and knelt down beside the mother. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm a social worker. Can I help with anything?" The woman looked relieved to hear my voice. She shook her head, her eyes wide and full of worry as she tried to explain the situation. I don't know what's going on," she said, her voice wavering. "He was playing and suddenly, he started crying and pointing at that trash can. He refuses to leave." My stomach churned. I didn't know what I expected to find, but something about the way the boy looked at that trash can made me feel something was very wrong. How could a child feel so much fear toward a simple, harmless object? "Can I take a look?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The mother nodded, pulling her son close to her while he kept pointing with his trembling finger, his eyes wide. I took a deep breath and approached the trash can. The strong smell of something rotting hit my nose before I even reached the lid, and for a second I considered giving up. But I couldn't. I was there for a reason. I looked back at the boy and his mother, knowing I had to keep going. With a trembling hand, I lifted the lid slowly, trying not to think about what I might find. Inside the trash can, among piles of food waste and gathered trash, there was something that shouldn't have been there. A small pink shoe covered in dirt and leaves. A chill ran down my spine. I knelt down and carefully pulled the shoe out, trying to keep my breathing steady. It was a child's shoe, the kind mothers buy for young girls, with a small white flower embroidered on the side. I recognized that shoe. Emily wore an identical pair in the photo I had on my desk. My mind raced in multiple directions at once. Could be a coincidence. Many children wear similar shoes, I told myself, trying to calm the panic rising within me. But something inside me screamed that it wasn't a coincidence, that this small detail was a clue, a sign that couldn't be ignored. The boy's mother, noticing my expression, grew tense. What is it?" she asked, noticing the change in my face. I turned to her, trying to stay calm, and gave a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just a child's shoe," I replied, trying not to alarm her further. But my hands were shaking. "I think it might be nothing, but maybe I should take a closer look." At that moment, something in the bottom of the trash can caught my attention. A shadow, something that seemed to faintly shine among the pile of debris. Feeling my heart pounding in my chest, I bent down again and reached out, carefully moving the trash around. My fingers touched something cold and hard. I pulled it out slowly, revealing a small necklace, tangled in strips of dirty paper and food scraps. The necklace had a heart-shaped pendant, gold, still shining despite the dirt. I knew what it was. Emily's mother had mentioned in our last conversation that the girl never left home without that necklace, a special gift from her father. My blood ran cold. There, in front of me, was something that couldn't be ignored. The boy, still sobbing, continued to point at the trash can, now with his face buried in his mother's shoulder. He seemed to know something we didn't, as if he saw what was beyond the reach of my eyes. My heart beat so hard that I could feel each pulse in my neck. I needed to get out of there, needed to take those items for analysis, but above all, I needed to understand what was happening. Something very wrong had happened, and somehow the boy knew. "I'll need to take this," I said to the mother, trying to sound firm while holding the shoe and necklace. She just nodded, her eyes wide with fear and incomprehension. The boy finally stopped crying, but he didn't take his eyes off the trash can, as if he expected something to emerge from the depths of that dirty, dark place. I returned to the car, holding the items carefully, and closed the door with a deep sigh. I didn't know what it meant, but it was clear that I had found something important. Something that might finally lead me to Emily, or at least give me a clue about what really happened to her. I returned to the office with the shoe and necklace carefully wrapped in a plastic bag. The place was empty, silent, except for the sound of the clock on the wall, marking time as if urging my steps. Every passing second felt like another step closer to the outcome of this case, or a dead end. I knew I needed to stay calm, but the discovery in the park had stirred something inside me. I had to know if those objects belonged to Emily. I placed the shoe and necklace on the desk and stood there, staring at them for a moment. I was alone in the room, but I felt the weight of the presence of all the missing children whose cases I had investigated before. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and dialed Emily's mother's number. My voice trembled as I asked specific questions about the shoe and the necklace. She confirmed, the golden heart, the pink shoe with the embroidered flower, they were, without a doubt, Emily's. When I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and fear. It was the first solid clue in months, but it also meant that something terrible had happened, that Emily was truly in danger. I had to act quickly. And that was exactly when Jeremy entered the office without even knocking. "Olivia," he said with that condescending tone I knew all too well, "I heard you found something at the park. Do you really think it's enough to pursue this?" He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, looking at me with an air of superiority that irritated me immediately. "It's enough for me," I replied without lifting my head. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of realizing how much his presence affected me. Jeremy was one of the most respected investigators in the city, and we had worked together on several cases. But he always seemed to be one step ahead, always challenging me as if I couldn't handle the pressure on my own. And deep down, maybe part of me believed that. He took a few steps into the room and looked at the objects on the desk, frowning. "Do you really think these items are going to lead anywhere?" he asked, the doubt clear in his voice. "Olivia, you know missing person cases usually go cold after the first few weeks. There's no guarantee that this is what you think it is." I felt my blood boil. "That's why you can't solve the hardest cases, Jeremy," I snapped, looking him directly in the eyes. "Because you give up before you even try." He seemed surprised for a second before recovering and giving a sarcastic smile. "It's not about giving up," he retorted calmly. It's about being realistic. But go ahead, Olivia. I know how much Emily means to you. I just don't want you to get hurt more than necessary." I stayed silent, watching him leave the room like a storm that only left chaos in its wake. I knew he was also working on Emily's case and that his words, as sharp as they were, held a bit of concern. But I also knew I couldn't let him take the case away from me. There was something in that clue and I was willing to follow every step, even if it meant confronting my own fears. As soon as Jeremy left, I sat down and began gathering all the information I had so far. Witness reports, photos of Emily, statements from her parents, and now the items found at the park. I spent the night reviewing everything, trying to find a connection, a pattern that could lead me somewhere. The picture of Emily on my desk seemed to stare at me, as if waiting for me to solve the mystery of her absence. The next day, I went to the forensic lab to request a detailed analysis of the shoe and necklace. I needed to be sure they were really Emily's and, if they were, to find any evidence that could link these items to her disappearance. The team accepted the evidence but warned me that results might take time, which only increased my frustration. I hated waiting, hated that feeling of helplessness, but I knew it was the necessary protocol. As days passed, I continued revisiting the park, trying to find any other clue that might have been overlooked. I searched every corner, checked nearby security cameras, spoke with residents and shopkeepers in the area, but nothing new emerged. It was as if the case had gone cold again, just as Jeremy had suggested. But I couldn't give up. Then one afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Jeremy. He had managed to get access to a new witness, someone who had something to say about the park and what might have happened around the time Emily disappeared. I hesitated for a moment before agreeing to meet him to hear the statement. I didn't want to rely on him, but I knew any clue was better than none. We met at a cafe near the park, and Jeremy was there, looking serious but without his usual sarcastic smile. He seemed genuinely concerned. The witness was a middle-aged woman who worked as a janitor in the area and said she had seen a girl playing alone near the trash can a few days before Emily disappeared. A girl who could very well have been Emily. As she described the scene, I felt a chill down my spine. The woman said she saw the girl talking to someone, a male figure partially hidden among the trees. And that was what made me freeze. The figure seemed to be waiting for the girl, almost as if he knew her. It wasn't a casual encounter. There was something very wrong in that account, but when I asked for more details, the woman shook her head, unable to remember anything more specific. Jeremy looked as frustrated as I was. For the first time, we were in the same boat, both of us searching for answers that always seemed just out of reach. I knew he was right about the case's difficulties, but I also knew I couldn't stop. Not after finding the shoe and necklace. Not after discovering that someone, perhaps a man, knew something about Emily's disappearance. The witness left, leaving Jeremy and me sitting at the table, both in silence, contemplating the next step. He was the first to speak, breaking the silence with a simple but direct question. "What are you going to do now, Olivia?" I took a deep breath, feeling the pressure build. "I'm going to find this person," I replied with determination. "Whoever he is, he knows something and I'm going to find out what it is." Jeremy nodded for the first time without contesting my decision. We were in this together, whether we liked it or not, and I knew the investigation was just beginning to heat up. From that point on, there was no turning back. Emily's case had become something bigger than I could have imagined, and now, with the first solid clue, I was determined to follow it to the end, no matter the cost. Time passed faster than I expected, and the sleepless nights began to take their toll. I was trapped in an endless cycle of clues that led nowhere, but I couldn't stop. Emily's face was always on my mind, like a shadow I couldn't avoid. Every new lead ended up being a dead end. The hope I'd felt after finding the items in the park was slowly turning into despair. I spent days reviewing old reports, transcribing testimonies, and analyzing details that might have been overlooked. I went to the forensic lab repeatedly, asking for the results of the shoe and necklace analysis, but they always told me the process was still ongoing. Worse than a negative answer was having no answer at all, and the waiting was eating me up inside. The tensions began to affect my relationships too. Marianne noticed I was more distant and insisted that I take a break, but the idea of stepping away from the case felt impossible. "You need to rest, Olivia. You're going to destroy yourself if you keep this up," she said one night as I absent-mindedly poked at the food she had prepared. I could hardly look her in the eyes. Marianne had always been a comforting presence in my life, someone who genuinely cared about me, but I couldn't give in. Not while there was a chance of finding Emily. "I know," I replied, trying to seem calmer than I actually was. "But I can't stop now. I'm close to something, I can feel it." Marianne sighed and squeezed my hand, but her gaze was full of concern. I knew she was right, but I also knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I found an answer, until I could give Emily's parents some form of closure. The nights grew longer and I started spending more time at the office than at home. Piles of documents and photos of Emily accumulated on my desk, mixed with hastily scribbled notes on loose papers. Each new idea seemed more desperate than the last, and my determination began to give way to doubt. Was I really on the right track? Was I capable of finding Emily, or was I just chasing shadows? One night, after hours of staring at maps and reports, I felt my eyes burning and my head pounding. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, it was already 3 in the morning. I tried to stand up from the chair, but my legs felt heavy and my mind was foggy. I grabbed my phone and called Jeremy, feeling the need to share something, anything, even if it meant hearing a taunt from him. "Olivia," he answered with a sleepy, hoarse voice, "do you have any idea what time it is?" "I needed to talk to someone," I said, my voice breaking from exhaustion. I feel like I'm losing control, Jeremy. Everything I find leads nowhere. And the lab results still haven't come back. I don't know what to do anymore." He stayed silent for a few seconds, which only increased my nervousness. I expected some sharp criticism, but what I heard was a softer, almost gentle tone. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Olivia. I know you want to solve this, but it's pointless if you destroy yourself in the process." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Instead, I thanked him and hung up the phone, feeling the weight of responsibility double on me. I closed my eyes and for the first time in a long time I cried. It was a silent, restrained cry, but enough to release some of the pent-up pressure. In the following days, I kept pursuing every lead, trying not to think about how exhausted I was. That was when the lab finally called. They had found something. My heart raced, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I listened to what they had to say. A strand of hair caught in Emily's shoe. Something so small, but it could change everything. I went straight to the lab, where I found the team waiting with serious expressions. They explained that the hair strand didn't belong to Emily but to an adult man. It was a crucial piece of evidence, something that could lead us to the suspect, and it renewed my strength. I had the feeling that I was finally on the right track. I took the evidence and began cross-referencing it with records of people seen in the vicinity of the park around the time of the disappearance. Jeremy showed up at the office unannounced, looking as intrigued as I was. He held the report and flipped through the pages with a serious expression. "It's a breakthrough," he said, finally looking at me. "But we need more than this. We need to find out who this man is." And so began a new phase of the investigation, even more intense and exhausting. We followed leads, reviewed security cameras that always seemed to fail at critical moments, and interviewed possible witnesses who had little to add. The hair strand had become our new hope, but also a new source of frustration. It seemed to push us in a direction without a clear conclusion. Meanwhile, Marianne grew more distant. One Sunday afternoon, after another sleepless night, she came to my office and found me surrounded by papers, with a cold cup of coffee beside me. She looked around, her eyes lingering on each detail, as if trying to understand how I had reached this point. I knew what she was going to say before she said it, but I waited anyway. "Olivia, this is destroying you," she said in a calm but firm voice. "You need a break, even if it's just for a day. Please." I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the guilt growing in my chest. "I can't, Marianne. Not now." She shook her head and left without saying another word. I felt an emptiness spread through the office when she closed the door, and the loneliness weighed even more. But I couldn't stop. I had to follow every lead, explore every possibility. The hair strand was my link, and I was determined not to let it slip away. even if it meant distancing myself from everyone and losing myself in the process. And so I continued, day after day, following leads that often led nowhere. My hands trembled from exhaustion and my eyes burned, but I couldn't give up. The responsibility weighed on my shoulders like an unbearable burden, and at the same time, I felt that I was getting closer to something, to a truth that, although frightening, might finally bring Emily back. That morning was like any other until an unexpected call turned everything upside down. I was in my office reviewing more details about the hair strand found on Emily's shoe when the phone rang. It was Jeremy, but his tone was not the same as usual. He was visibly shaken, as if he were in trouble. "Olivia," he began, breathing heavily, "we need to talk. Urgently." Immediately, something twisted in my stomach. If Jeremy wanted to talk urgently, then something was very wrong. "What happened?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Not over the phone." "Meet me on the street now," he replied before hanging up. There was no time to hesitate. I grabbed my coat and rushed out, not knowing what to expect. I found Jeremy on the corner of an empty street, visibly nervous. He seemed to be waiting for someone, but when he saw me, he hurried over. His look was filled with an anguish I didn't recognize. It was an expression that didn't match the man who had always been so confident, so sure of himself. "Olivia, you need to know something," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I was manipulated. I didn't know it, but now it all makes sense." I looked at him skeptically. "Manipulated? What do you mean by that?" He looked around as if making sure no one was listening and then lowered his voice. "Remember that lead in the park? The one you found? I knew about it, Olivia. I'm the reason you followed it." My heart raced. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" Jeremy stepped back, looking around again. He seemed nervous, as if he were afraid even of his own words. "I was pressured by someone inside the police to make sure you followed that lead. They knew you'd latch onto it because you're too persistent. You wouldn't let it go no matter what." I stood silent for a few seconds, trying to process what he had just said. You're saying this was all a plan to deceive me?" I asked, my voice sounding weaker than I wanted. "Yes," he answered, and his expression was one of guilt. I didn't want to be used, Olivia. But I was under threat. They said that if I didn't do what they asked, they would ruin my career, destroy everything I'd built. They manipulated the situation so cleverly that I didn't realize it until now. With every word he spoke, a part of my world crumbled. I had always known Jeremy wasn't my ally, but I never imagined he was so deeply involved in something so dirty. He wasn't just an arrogant rival. He was being used to cover up something bigger, something more dangerous. "Who else knows about this?" I asked, almost not wanting to know the answer. Distrust was beginning to spread within me, and a heavy sense of betrayal filled my chest. "I don't know exactly who's behind this," Jeremy replied, his eyes avoiding mine. "But I know the investigations are being sabotaged. I know because I was forced to interfere in ways that I can no longer justify." That moment left me in shock. Every detail of the investigation seemed to have been manipulated, like pieces of a game I couldn't understand. I was being led down a false path without realizing it. The lead in the park, that same lead I thought was my biggest hope, was just bait carefully placed to divert me from the real case. "You didn't know what you were doing, Jeremy?" I asked, the pain of betrayal evident in my voice. He looked at me with remorse, but that didn't change the fact that in some way he was helping deceive me. I didn't know how far it would go, Olivia. But now I do. They're manipulating everything and they're making me do their dirty work. But I can't keep going like this. Not after everything I've seen. The anger I felt toward him mixed with confusion and disbelief. "Who are they, Jeremy? Who's behind all this?" He hesitated for a moment, as if struggling to decide if he should tell me. Then finally he stepped closer, almost whispering, "I think there's someone in the police force. Someone who doesn't want Emily's case to be solved. Someone who has too much to lose if we uncover the truth." Those words fell like a bomb. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined the problem was so close. Jeremy had been the key to the revelation, but at the same time he was becoming a piece I could no longer trust. But the truth was there, right in front of me, and I had to move forward. Are you going to help me find out who's behind this? I asked, my voice firm now. I couldn't turn back anymore. If there was someone within the police manipulating the investigations, I needed to expose it no matter the cost. Jeremy looked at me and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He knew he was in a delicate position, but something in him was changing. He was no longer the man who had been manipulated. Now he seemed determined to correct his mistakes. Yes, he finally replied. I'll help you. It was enough to give me new hope. But I also knew this put us both in a dangerous position. And as he handed me this information, something told me there were still more secrets to uncover, secrets that could destroy everything I had worked for up to now. Everything had led to this moment. I was tired, physically and emotionally drained, but I couldn't stop now. What I had uncovered, the web of lies, the manipulated games, the complicity within the police itself, gave me the strength to keep going. I was no longer just searching for Emily but seeking justice. This entire network of corruption needed to be exposed. And I finally had the evidence in my hands. Jeremy, despite having betrayed me, was now my ally. He knew the risk we were taking, but he also knew that if we wanted to uncover the truth, we'd have to work together. I had forced him to open his eyes to what was really going on. And now he was willing to help dismantle the conspiracy involving corrupt officers, those who somehow wanted to keep Emily's case, and other missing children's cases, hidden. The operation was scheduled for that night, in a remote warehouse where those involved in the network of disappearances kept their secret activities. We knew what was at stake and there was no turning back. We arrived at the location before the scheduled time. Jeremy, nervous, looked at me. Are you sure about this? We're going up against the highest authorities here. I looked at him, feeling the weight of the decision but also an unexpected strength. I have no choice, Jeremy. This is much bigger than I imagined. If we don't do this now, more children will disappear, more parents will suffer. I can't let that happen. I know, he replied in the firmest voice I'd ever heard. I'll do whatever it takes. We walked down the deserted street leading to the warehouse, our steps echoing in the stillness of the night. In the distance, the lights of the place flickered menacingly. The tension was palpable. When we reached the meeting point, Jeremy nodded, and within minutes, we were standing in front of the warehouse entrance, where we knew the police were covering up crimes. Inside the warehouse, the scene we found was both horrifying and revealing. A hidden room with files, photos, and evidence of other disappearances. But the biggest surprise was in the back of the room. Emily was there, tied up and visibly traumatized but alive. My heart raced. I had finally found her. Emily was there in the flesh. The relief was overwhelming, but there was no time for celebration. I knew the perpetrators were still nearby. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could react, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. It was Captain Dale, the man I had trusted. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was victorious. He had manipulated everything all along, and now he was about to win. He knew the investigation was getting close to the truth, and he had taken preemptive action. "Did you really think you could stop me, Olivia?" he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. This whole story was a distraction. It wasn't just about Emily, it was much more. I was selling these children. You're not the only one who plays dirty. The shock was immediate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Captain Dale, the man who was supposed to protect children, was behind it all. Disgust washed over me, a silent rage burning in my throat. "You're going to pay for this," I said, trying to keep calm. I needed a strategy, and what terrified me most now was knowing my own life was at risk. "You think you can arrest me now? You're just a social worker, Olivia. You have no power to do anything. Your story ends here," he mocked, advancing toward me. I was alone against him and the other men who appeared in the room. But then Jeremy threw himself in front of Dale, stopping him from reaching me. "You're not controlling me anymore, Dale," he shouted. I could see that whatever had once bound him to those corrupt people had vanished completely. In a quick move, Jeremy managed to disarm Dale and pinned him to the ground. It was a tense struggle, but finally the truth was freed. With the help of the police, we managed to arrest not only Dale but also other members involved in the scheme. The rescue team was called, and Emily was immediately taken for medical care. She was fragile, but her survival was the greatest victory I could have achieved. In the following days, the truth was revealed to the world. The scandal involving Captain Dale and other corrupt police officers made headlines, and a child trafficking network was dismantled. It wasn't an easy victory, but it was a necessary one. What I hadn't expected was how this would change me. I had always thought that finding Emily would be the culmination of everything I had worked for, but instead, what I found was a transformation within myself. I was no longer just the social worker investigating disappearances. I was someone who, with courage and determination, had challenged a broken system and rescued a life, and so many others, from darkness. I never forgot Emily. Her recovery was slow, but she became the symbol of why I should never give up. She and so many other children deserved to be saved. Now, I knew my mission wasn't over. What I had truly gained was a new sense of purpose. And that purpose would guide me in all the investigations still to come. The fight was far from over, but I knew I wasn't alone. And now, more than ever, I was ready to face whatever came my way.